Good evening, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to World Human Sciences and Management Conference 2021. This is Rudra Narayan Das, Executive Director, Center for Adivasi Research and Development. We are proud to announce that this conference is conducted along with Indian Institute of Management, Sambalpur, Central University of Odisha, Koraput, and Ravenshaw University, Cuttack. I welcome our speaker for today, Professor Wenne W. Smith, and participants across the globe through Facebook and YouTube Live, and who are here to listen Professor Smith. The broader theme of this conference is agnotological context, disciplinary practices of social sciences, and policy frames. On behalf of Center for Adivasi Research and Development, I extend my profound gratitude to our patrons, Professor Dr. Mahadev Jaiswal, Director, Indian Institute of Management, Professor Dr. Sharad Kumar Palita, Vice Chancellor, Central University of Odisha, and Professor Dr. Sanjay Kumar Nayak, Vice Chancellor, Ravenshaw University, Cuttack. The convener of this largest virtual conference, eminent Indian historian, Professor Chandi Prasad Nanda, and eminent policy activist and writer, and also a very good philanthropist, Mr. Charudat Panigrahiji. Dear friends, the main outcome of this conference is to come up with a national and international framework for the education system in future. The crux of this conference will be the use of digital technologies such as artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and virtual reality that is being increasingly adopted after the outbreak of COVID-19. We hope this conference would help students, faculties, researchers, and all to expand their mental horizon and help the education system to adopt the best. Ladies and gentlemen, the Center for Adivasi Research and Development is a leading research-oriented institution promoting ethnographic, empirical, and evidence-based research for engaging and addressing the challenges that 21st century globe is facing today. The prime agenda of this institution is to come up with a potential policy solution for social change, while believing in the idea of 3D, that means the debate, dialogue, and discussion, and E3, expertise, experiencing, and education. The institution focuses on marginalized communities and work for their livelihood to protect the nature, culture, language, and identity in particular. The age of modernity has witnessed that change is the only constant phenomenon for the societal purpose to enhance knowledge. Our information work for them is methodological and avoid paradoxically framework, which neglected so many centuries from theory to become practice. The Center for Adivasi Research and Development sincerely believe in the concept of social marketing, which is seriously looking for non-profit marketing and builds new social entrepreneurship for check and balance mechanism. To glorify generations to come. Center for Adivasi Research and Development come to serve with a holistic approach of critical thinking in education to fill the gaps, to plan accordingly for the voiceless communities. Ladies and gentlemen, in this evening, we have with us one of the very finest brain of our 21st century is none other than Professor Wenne W. Smith. Professor Smith is graduated with his PhD in Geography and Environmental Studies from the Wilfrid Laurier University. Dr. Smith spent 15 years at the College of Charleston in South Carolina, United States, where he served as the chair of the department and won the Charleston Area CVB Golden Pineapple Award for contributing to tourism. In 2020, he returned to his hometown, Toronto, Ontario. It's in Canada, to join the Ryerson University Ted Rogers School of Hospitality and Tourism Management. Dr. Smith's research centers primarily on tourism, behavior, and policy. He currently served as the co-editor of the Journal of Teaching and Travel and Tourism, and on his editorial board of 6 other journals. Professor Smith will deliver his talk on NIMBY and its effects on tourism policy in this webinar. Now, I would like to invite Professor Smith to initiate his talk. Over to you, Professor Smith.
Thank you, Professor Rudra. Sorry to interrupt Professor Smith. Now I would like to request Professor Srinivasalu NS from National Law University Judicial Academy of Calcutta to go for a opening remark. Then you will start your talk, sir. Thank you. Thank you for all the way connecting with us from Canada.
Thank you, Vikram. Good evening to one and all, and a special good evening to Professor Smith from Toronto. While congratulating the Center for Adivasi Research and Development, Odisha, for hosting this marathon series of webinars under the broader heading of Management and Social Sciences Conclave or webinar, I would like to give my introductory remarks with respect to today's program. We all know that across the globe, in all the 222 nations, tourism has taken a serious beating during the year 2020 and also the current year, basically because of the pandemic of COVID. So every nation, for that matter, is looking forward to how exactly we can revive tourism industry in the respective regions. So in this context, I'm very happy to see and participate in this webinar where Professor Smith is going to talk about the impact of impact on tourism with respect to a particular selected policy as such. So not only the Center for Adivasi Research and Development, Odisha, India, of course, across the globe, would like to see what type of impact the post-COVID scenario would have on the tourism industry across the global level. And I believe and hope that Professor Smith would throw some light on this aspect. And since Professor Smith is from Toronto, Canada, I do have some academic and professional connections in Toronto under certain public and private institutions as well. And I know very specifically how Canadian academicians and professionals, throw their line of thought with respect to the global scenarios and situations, especially in the current pandemic scenario and that of COVID. So while once again welcoming Professor Smith on behalf of CANT, Center for Adivasi Research and Development, Odisha in India, and as well, I'm very happy to present Professor Smith at this global forum hosted by the Center for Adivasi Research and Development. I welcome one and all, and very happy welcome to Professor Smith. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, Professor Srinivasalu. Now I'd like to request Professor Smith to initiate his talk. Welcome, sir.
Thank you all for inviting me, and I'm thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled to have this time to have this conversation with you. You know, is one of the great things is to be able to share ideas across cultures and across spaces, and you know, we all work to make the world a better place when we share ideas. So I'd love to hear your ideas as well as we go through and we chat with this. And I think this is a really important topic, and it's one that we haven't spent really enough time thinking about in terms of tourism development. So I wanted to take a few minutes and sort of tell you sort of a little bit of a story that I'll get into in a minute here. But I want to put it in this context of not in my backyard. And this idea and concept started sort of in the late 80s and into the early 90s, where developments were starting to happen. So for example, they would want to put low cost housing into a neighborhood, and the neighborhoods would start to fight back with it because they didn't want poorer people and poorer houses around there because they thought it might increase crime and all that sort of stuff. Or it could have been related to, I don't want a power plant near my house, or I don't want, I don't want whatever X organization or dump or anything like that, or transit. I don't want this public transit stop near my house because it's going to lower the value of my property and stuff like that. And there's been a lot of arguments over the years where some people talk about it as this is the ultimate. Communities get to say and have a say in how their land, how the community around them is built and developed. So in other words, it's very democratic in a lot of ways. And in other times, people will argue from a negative perspective, saying you're never going to build low-cost housing or affordable housing if people in richer neighborhoods always say, no, we don't want that near us. Or you're never going to build public goods like power plants or like public transportation if people are always fighting it. So it's this constant back and forth kind of battle that's created in this sort of environment. And this is sort of what I want to talk about today, is this idea that what do we do in a world where something could be good for a broader neighborhood, but not necessarily good for an immediate neighborhood or perceived as good in the neighborhood, and where you have people start to think, not in my backyard. And the idea of this is that it is that constant battle between individual rights versus collective rights. But I want to reframe this today, because this is always looked at as a policy question in terms of rights, in terms of battling and stuff like that. But I want to reframe this in that if we think about the triple bottom line, we think about, in terms of sustainability, balancing planet, profits. And we've talked a lot about balancing planet and profits, but the third element is people. And we haven't really described, and we haven't done a lot of work on how we balance people and community needs and community ideas and community concepts with this. And I wanted to start with this idea because about 18 years ago, I moved into Charleston, South Carolina. When I first moved there, it was a destination of had about between 2.5 and 3 million visitors, overnight visitors a year, right? And in the years I left, it really built up as a tourism destination. It got named the #1 tourism destination in the United States and all that sort of stuff. And by the time I left, there was, in a pre-COVID era, close to 10 million. And the development, when I first moved in, the tourist district was relatively small. You could walk the tourist district in less than an hour. By the time I moved out of Charleston, the tourist district was almost double in size. And you got to see homes that were once affordable now become $1 million plus properties. And you got to see areas that, residents would not have been walking around because they would have be perceived as safe, now turned into tourist district, where thousands of people are walking the streets on an everyday basis. It was a town that went through a tremendous transformation. And I want to sort of talk about this balancing of not in my backyard with sustainable tourism development. And this is something I want to do. To give you a sense, Charleston, South Carolina, for a lot of you who don't know US geography, is a very historic place. It was the biggest city in the southeastern United States when it was first settled. It was one of the first settlements of the United States. It was also the place where the reality is most of the slaves came through Charleston, South Carolina. It was the major port for the southeastern United States. So slavery has a huge component. Many of the battles for the War of Independence were fought around Charleston, South Carolina. It is a city with tremendous history. The biggest thing Charleston's known for is where the US Civil War started. So it is, once again, a major battleground in US history. And its history has always been as a major center of US history as a whole. What was interesting about Charleston, South Carolina, is that it was a major port, and then they started building railways and they started building other things, and the city became of less of importance. It used to be the biggest city in the whole southeastern United States, and then over time, Atlanta and Charlotte, South Carolina, and Florida, Miami, Florida started getting built up, and more of these types of cities, started building up, and Charleston became less important as transportation and other things started getting built up. And it became a military installation. So it was the House of Navies and Navy developed a Navy base for a long time. The Navy in the late 80s pulled out. So they closed the base, and it basically, in a lot of ways, devastated the economy of the city because it was very much based on a military structure. And it wasn't the pretty city that you kind of will see in a minute. So the idea behind it is that in 1989, a major hurricane hit. Hurricane Hugo hit Charleston, South Carolina in 1989 and basically flattened the downtown. It devastated the city as a whole, the hurricane or typhoon, depending what part of the world you know it as. And the idea of it is, well, how were they going to rebuild? They didn't have the military economy. A lot of the industrial stuff moved out. Of the things that supported the military industry moved out. And the mayor of the city came up with this idea of, well, we are the hub of history for the whole southeastern United States. Why don't we build a strong tourism destination? And it started after Hurricane Hugo with the building of the Charleston Place Hotel. And it started building this thing and started building this industry called tourism, which now is the major industry of the city. I want to give you a little picture of it so you can kind of see what the city looks like and sort of get a sense of what it is. They've done a really good job of preserving the history and preserving the beauty of this place and space. So.
One of the great things about Charleston is this vibrant culture.
You have so much history.
And you're not far from water, no matter where you are in Charleston.
And this is a town full of top-notch restaurants.
Charleston is an incredibly romantic place.
The fresh air, the smells of Confederate jasmine.
Charleston has everything.
So depending on what you're looking for, you can find it in Charleston.
So just to give you a sense of what it looks like, the challenge becomes is as tourism rises, also then it develops this concept of, okay, it's pushing out neighborhoods. Neighborhoods that used to be affordable in downtown Charleston are now people are coming in and redeveloping them and rebuilding them. And all of a sudden the city is becoming more expensive. It's becoming more inaccessible to the local population in a lot of ways. A lot of the times, the only way the citizens can afford to come downtown and dine at one of the nice restaurants is, when they're working there. So it's these things that start getting, and then you start seeing these kind of attitudes towards tourism killing cities, and you start to see signs and you start to see graffiti about sort of what's going on in these destinations. And this is something I wanted to kind of point out, because the thing about it is that why do people come to destinations? Why do people come to places? Well, they come to places because they want to connect and learn about the place and the space. Well, if the residents don't want you there, it doesn't make for a very welcoming attitude. It doesn't make for a very welcoming place. And you kill the very product that people are coming to see. So one of the things that happens is when you have this initial really big push for development and development of tourism, and you see this mass development of tourism coming, the residents are saying, I love the jobs, I love the opportunities, but then they start thinking, uh-oh, our city is changing, our place is changing, and maybe not for the better. Maybe the jobs aren't as well paid as we think they are. And maybe they're more seasonal, depending on where you go. And maybe the guests coming in are changing the way the community perceives and the community acts. Guests may be doing something that people feel are inappropriate. They're walking down the street drunk, and intoxicated. They're doing things that people don't necessarily want. They're littering. They're making the city more dirty. All of a sudden, it's harder to find parking in the tourist district. It's harder to get into the restaurants that you want to go to that you used to. And all of a sudden, it starts changing the way of life in the destination as the tourism grows. And what happens is you start to get tourist resentment, and you start to get local communities who are saying, maybe this isn't such a good thing. Maybe this isn't something that we want to promote and have in our communities. And this is something I kind of started thinking about really deeply, because how can you create a tourism product that's going to grow, that's going to provide a good economic base, but yet doesn't have the negative effects on the community in the same way? And this is one of the things that I thought was really fascinating when I started thinking about these concepts. And what is this balancing act? And let me show you something. And I want to show you two videos here. I'm going to show you two videos. And in these videos was really interesting. In the year 2013, Charleston won the top city in the United States for the third year in a row for tourism. What was really interesting about that is if you look at the ad and you see sort of how it promotes doing that, they got such community backlash from that the next year when they won the same award, you'll see a totally different approach to how they talked about the award. But let me show you the first video, because this is how the destination marketing organizations, this is how the tourism developers saw it. They saw this as an excellent opportunity to really grow tourism and really develop tourism in the city, as you would think with a major award.
This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. How much do I love you? Let me tell you 3 ways. I could tell you 300, but that'll take all day.
3 reasons to come to Charleston: the beautiful waterways, the food, obviously, and beautiful, amazing low country sunsets.
You got to come to Charleston because of the weather. It's great weather, friendly people, and of course Charleston is a very historic city.
Number 1, the history. Number 2, the shopping. Number 3, the food.
Well, you know that I love you, and I want you to know. Well, here's just a few reasons. Let me tell you 3 in a row. 3 steeples reaching for the sky. 3 beaches stretching far and wide. 3 shrimp boats flowing through the sea. 3 and sweet teas by an ancient oak tree.
I would say a must is to visit the city market. And I also think that taking a carriage tour is absolutely a must. And lastly is to take something that's water, whether it's a harbor cruise or some type of a spirit line cruise.
A must in Charleston is to sit down and talk to some local people. You've got to go to the beach. And then third, I think you have to just get out and walk the streets.
Walk after dinner. Just sort of walk around and create your own experience. Second, the Citadel Dress Parade. If you were by chance here on a Friday afternoon, go. And number 3 is talk to a local.
How much do I love you? Well, let me tell you 3 ways. I could tell you 300, but that'll take all day. Well, you know that I love you, but I want you to know. Well, here's a few reasons. Let me tell you 3 in a row. 3 palmetto trees blowing in the breeze. 3 these chefs working hard to please. 3 rooftops, perfect view to see. 3 history, pretty as can be.
As you see there, the way the video is set up is it's set up in a way that is really promoting more and more tourism and promoting how more people to come. And what happened as a result of this video was they had tremendous backlash from the community saying, okay, we've developed all this tourism, we're winning all these awards, but it's too much, too fast, too soon. You started seeing people asking for hotel moratoriums, where they wouldn't build any more hotels. The carriage tours, they put strict limits on where the carriage tours can go and how many carriage tours that they could come into certain neighborhoods at any given time. They started putting real limits on, they started upping all the taxes to make sure all the cities. And all this backlash sort of really led to almost an idea to, can we demarket tourism? Can we take tourism and sort of let's simmer it down for a little bit to make it more community acceptable and community things. And the funny thing is, the next year when they won the exact same award, this is what the video looked like. And I think you'll see a stark difference in the attitude from the Destination Marketing Organization towards tourism and tourism development. So as you can see in the two different types of ads, the first year, it was a hard sell of tourism. They're selling all the different things you could do in the destination. They were selling that they were the top destination in the United States. It was really, really front and center. And a lot of the community felt, you're selling the community in a way that we weren't comfortable with that. You know, we weren't comfortable with how you're putting us out as this mass tourism destination and selling and trying to bring even more people to the destination. And as you saw in the second year, after they sort of got some of that backlash, it was a much softer sell. They didn't even mention the awards that they got. And you would think most destination marketing organizations, yeah, we're going to crow this. We're winning major awards. But you'll see in the second year, they didn't even mention it. And this is rooted. So this idea of NIMBY, or not in my backyard, comes from this concept of over-tourism. And we saw a lot of work, especially pre-COVID, with this idea of over-tourism. And in terms of over-tourism, what it means is that it feels like the tourism is overwhelming and over breaking the destination as a whole. It could be with volumes of people, it could be with the amount of development, it could be with the pricing and affordability in the city. It could be with crime. There's all kinds of elements related to over-tourism. And it's one of the topics in a pre-COVID world, and even not post-COVID, but we'll talk more about that in a second. But over-tourism, if you look at all the literature, really, really discusses how when development isn't managed in a way where you're going to meet the community and the community is going to perceive value from the tourism, where they're perceiving the costs outweighing the benefits, people are going to start to fight against tourism. And when you get locals all of a sudden saying, I don't want tourism anymore, I don't want these people in my neighborhood, all of a sudden the policies and the regulations start to go against this idea of tourism. So let me show you an example of this. So one of the things that happened in Charleston is that all of a sudden the hotel moratorium, and I want to show you.
Happening right now, Charleston City Council considering a one-year ban on new hotels on the peninsula. Mayor John Tecklenburg of Charleston proposed the idea during his campaign, and during the moratorium, officials will study how more hotels would impact the city and whether more zoning restrictions are needed. News 2's Matt Abba is at that meeting, and he'll have much more tonight at 11 o'clock.
So in this case, you saw, the community was fighting to ban more hotels being built. And in this case, there was also other regulations that came in. All of a sudden, they started limiting how many liquor licenses. They started limiting what time the bars could be open to. They started limiting the tours that were available and where the tours could go and how many people could be on a tour. So all of a sudden, you start to see a bunch of restrictions on the tourism industry being placed by the locals as a result of the pressure from the local community feeling like this is too much, two things. And if you think this is a Charleston problem, here's two examples. Maui looking at a hotel moratorium. It didn't go through, but they had a lot of people in this, and this is this year. This is after COVID. And you look at the New York Times. New York was looking to curb new hotel build and looking at regulations in places. So this is not something that's unique to Charleston, although I'm telling it in that story. The idea of this is when we start looking behind it is this concept of when the development isn't in line with the community, what happens is this concept of not in my backyard and these sentiments towards not in my backyard start to rise, ferment, and develop. And what happens is pressure gets put on leaders to put a cap and to put limits on this. And when we take a look at this from a triple bottom line perspective, where we're trying to balance planet, profit, and people, what ends up happening is that we see the profit at first is really, really taking over this concept. We're seeing how profit is being the main driver. But what happens is when you only consider profit, right? When you're only considering this element here, I think it's really important for people to understand, right? When you only see the profit being driven, what happens is you're starting to deteriorate the people's willingness to develop it and do it. And it causes a lot of problems within the industry. It causes a lot of place and space issues. So what happens is you then have to sort of think about this model in a different way. It will reduce your profits long-term if the community isn't going to be supportive of this. They're going to put caps on you. They're going to they're going to fight the tourism industry. And eventually what happens is guests no longer start to feel welcome in your destination. So what happens is if the people are feeling this is not equitable, this is not equitable development, that people are building these things and not doing good for the local community, not doing good for the things, they're going to fight it. And basically, it's going to reduce your profit and it's going to reduce your ability to actually make money. Because I'll tell you one story here, and I always like to tell this story. There was a hotel in downtown Charleston, and they were building a rooftop pool and a rooftop element. And while they were building the hotel, one of the neighborhood associations came by and said, listen, we know you're building and we appreciate that there's going to be construction noises and stuff like that. And it was built. So the community association came over and said, listen, while we accept the noise and stuff, can you not on weekends not start hammering until 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning so people could sleep in, so people could have quality of life and they can have a quality weekend morning. And the owner basically told the community to go away, that we're going to do what we're going to do anyway. And they did that. Well, the story goes is that that rooftop, when they originally did their permits, was only going to be for special events. And what happened is at the end, when they finished the hotel, they realized that a rooftop bar would be really, really profitable. And they went to change their permit, and the local community fought them on it and fought them on it. And it took them 2 years and hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees to be able to get that. If they had cooperated with the community to begin with, they probably would not have had to go through that fight to get that sort of work done. And this is sort of what we're talking about here, is this idea of, yes, we've talked a lot about the planet and making things environmentally sound and making things work well from an environmental perspective. And we talk about profit, but we haven't spent enough time talking about the people and creating a community that's going to be supportive of an industry like tourism. So we've now gone through this COVID thing where tourism has been absolutely devastated just about everywhere. It's been an industry that's been in a whole lot of trouble and had some real challenges associated with it. So now we keep talking about this idea that's coming out, and this came from Anna Pollock, of regenerative tourism. And what we're doing now is we've learned through these policies, because when COVID happened, restaurants were one of the hardest to be hit with COVID policies. So was travel in general, and so were hotels. And basically, and the thing about it is they learned, because the communities a lot of times didn't really support these industries and saw them as low paying or bad jobs, and perceived them as being exploitive of communities. The communities weren't really fighting to keep these businesses open or to assist these businesses during COVID period. They learned the lesson the hard way that getting community support is imperative to really developing clear policy. in Charleston, what's really interesting about it is one of the things a lot of people didn't realize is that the tourism and accommodations and lodging taxes and the restaurant taxes were keeping property taxes artificially low. Last year, when they didn't have the tourism taxes, related taxes didn't come in, they now are seeing a property tax increase across the board as a result of that this year. And it's something that a lot of people are angry about because they never really understood how tourism, and it was never communicated, how these tourism was helping to support the community as a whole and keeping costs down. That was never communicated in that way. So as we get into this regenerative tourism mindset in a post-COVID world, we're now more and more taking this idea and these concepts about being something and creating something that makes a whole lot of sense, where we're looking beyond the stakeholders, right? And we're looking beyond, we're looking beyond this area here. This is where we were normally looking at things, but now we've learned through the COVID, hopefully, that this actually prevents us from doing well if we only stop here. If we're only stopping here, people aren't going to support us in a policy way. They're not, and it's going to limit profits. It's going to limit our ability to do business. It is only when we're building from and looking at the community and including the community and the planet that we're truly going to build a sustainable business model that's going to be able to drive business in a way that's not just going to be good for 2 years or 3 years, but it's going to be there 20 years from now and be something that's really important. Tourism is a force of renewal. It can change communities in a way that's really, really important. And we're starting to see destinations sort of take this in. So let me give you one example I'm going back to my Charleston story. This is an ad the CVB just put out recently to sort of try to start to bring the community in under the big tent of this thing called tourism, and not be, we're the tourist industry, you're the community, never shall, we make our money, leave us alone. It doesn't quite work that way. The community is in its health part of the product. It's part of the thing that makes sense. And here's an indication that this is, trying to communicate to the community how important they are as part of being a partner in the process.
Tourism in Charleston is a big deal. Visitors from all over the world arrive every year, seeking to invest their vacation dollars in the place we call home. They come for a number of reasons: our unique history, centuries-old architecture, pristine beaches, fine dining and accommodations, and an endless array of things to see and do. But the Lowcountry isn't the only place offering these things. So why do so many visitors return year after year? It's all thanks to our hospitality professionals. Without question, it is the people working within our hospitality industry that make the Charleston area the #1 destination in the United States. 2020 was extremely difficult for all Americans, especially those in the hospitality industry. But after a year of lockdowns, Charleston streets are beginning to bustle once more. In the hospitality industry, every position matters. Whether it's interacting with guests or behind the scenes, every job directly impacts a visitor's experience. Yes, visitors are now returning to Charleston, and like usual, those in hospitality will make their experience exceptional. When you interact with someone in the industry, be sure to thank them. And if you serve in the industry, the Lowcountry thanks you. We know Charleston tourism is a big deal only because you make it a big deal.
So this goes into this idea of NIMBY, and this is how sort of NIMBY is expressed and how it helps shape these ideas. So you have institutionalized NIMBY, which is what you saw in that last video, where a lot of people started thinking about hospitality jobs as being inferior, being low paid, being unattractive jobs. So when they had to rehire everyone, they couldn't find staff. They couldn't find people who were willing to work in the industry. They couldn't find people that they needed. So therefore, because of that, there was an institutionalized and a personal, and then you also have the personal bias where only like poor people and only things. And these are things that start to really, really affect your ability to operate and develop a good business and develop a good business model. And this is where people are fighting you constantly to deliver the business and deliver tourism in a way that's going to drive successful profits. And this idea of institutionalized and personal bias, when you get negative attitudes in the community about something, it's very difficult to change the negative attitudes. Once the mind is negative, it's very difficult to move it back into a positive mindset. So if you think about Nimbyism, the things that really affect it is the idea of home ownership. How is this affecting my property? How is this affecting where I'm living? Gentrification. And in this case, you both had a gentrification where the employees working in the industry can't afford to live anywhere near where the industry is being delivered because of the gentrification. The low-cost housing got moved up into expensive housing, and even the mid-cost housing moved into the ultra-luxury department. So what happens is none of the people who were working in the industry, because of the success of the industry in the pre-COVID world and the development of it, created this idea that I can't even live anywhere close to this. There's places like Hilton Head, South Carolina, that literally have to run buses for an hour and a half just to get their staff one way back and forth to be able to work. Otherwise, they wouldn't have enough staff. They actually have to hire buses to do it because of the gentrification issues. If they had supported public housing, if they had supported lower cost housing in the neighborhoods and stuff like that, and really built a neighborhood that had diverse, a lot of these problems would actually enhance their business. They would have solved a lot of the things that are now affecting their businesses in a very negative way. In terms of politics, people's trust and the ideological beliefs. And one of the things that, if you know anything about the United States right now, is there's a very big ideological divide. If one says something, if one says black, the other side's going to say white just because it's the other side that says it. They cannot agree. They cannot bring that two things. And that mentality is going to affect how business is grown, the planning process, the growth plans. So how do you do a sustainable growth plan and a slower growth plan? And these are things that you start to think about. Charleston perhaps maybe grew too quickly and with too much too fast. And the thing about it is, could you have put a curb on that to develop in a more sustainable or a slower way that would have built more opportunity in a longer term? From the social, you have the racial discrimination and the social attitudes towards it. Because once again, the social attitudes where these tourists are coming in, they're using all of our resources, they're using the parking, they're creating more traffic. All these jobs are low paid, and we're not getting real benefits out of that. And this goes into spatial. They've changed my hometown. I don't recognize it anymore. I don't recognize it being that busy. I can't even go to my favorite church or whatever on the weekend because I can't get near it. I can't get close to it. So how then do we deal with this situation? We deal with it by really starting to work with communities in terms of building developer and credibility. We need to develop good reputations. We need to do more community outreach where we tell people, we communicate to people sort of what's going on and what's happening. We need to talk about education. We need to make better links with education and have people connect with it. People didn't understand in Charleston that 45 cents out of the budget in Charleston of the city budget actually came from tourism taxes. And when those tourism taxes were diminished greatly, it really hurt the city, and it's going to cost everyone else. The city had more police, they had more parks, they had more resources because of this tourism thing. And it's one of the things that we did. The institutional approaches, how then do you manage the institutional approaches to make the building and building all these concepts? How do we make it in a streamlined thing so people can have a say, people can feel like they're being heard, people can do things that make sense, so that you're not getting this constant community backlash and going through the particular problems. And then the court-based, because the minute you get into litigation, it gets really expensive really quickly. So this gets us into this concept of being inclusive and developing place-based practices. This is not going to be one size fits all for everybody, but the idea is, how do you take these regenerative principles that we talked about earlier, and then build that with place and community, and being inclusive within development, and bringing these things together to create this concept of place-based practices, which Joseph Cheer has been really promoting. And I think this is something, as we rebuild tourism in a post-COVID environment, we need to really start thinking about this. So let me give you a solid example of this, right? So in terms of a work environment, if we want to be a successful industry, we have to create jobs that have security, that have livable wages, that provides for an equitable environment. So people, and that reflect the community. And we need to have people. So if you have people who are having good jobs and good things, they're going to go out and tell their neighbors, they're going to tell their friends that these are good places. This is a good business to have in your community. You have to do community outreach. You have to be part of the community. You have to support employee causes. You have to embrace diversity and inclusion. And you have to have active participation. You just can't, you're going to have charitable events in the community. You can't just put a sign up on the wall and expect that to be, but you need to have active participation. You need to have the leaders of your organization out in the community so that people can talk to them, people know who they are, and people can reach them if there's any dispute or any things that they're concerned about. The more accessible you make them, the less impact you're going to have on your business in long term, because you're going to know about problems before they become problems. Management, you need to be transparent in your communication with the community. This is what we want to do, and this is why we want to do it. And you need to be effective and efficient in that communication. You need to not have it buried in page 18 of your website under 15 links, and this is what our expansion plan or whatever. You need to put it out there so that the community can find it and that they can ask questions and you can be transparent about it. Because one of the things that really gets NIMBY up is when people think you're going to do something nefarious or you're going to do something wrong. You're going to tell them one thing, then do another. And that's what they're really afraid of. And a lot of the times with the NIMBY, if they know what they're getting into, and they know what sort of protections you're going to put in, and you can have that dialogue, you can eliminate a lot of that. And the politics, you need to communicate with your local leaders, and you need to participate in the community associations. So talking to the community and making yourself accessible. And that's one of the things. And one of the things we really haven't done well in the tourism industry is really discuss our biggest bonus is the economic impact. But one of the things we need to do is communicate the economic impact, but also using local partnerships where possible, using more and more local people and bringing them under the tent and having them understand the development of the ideas here. So in conclusion, my argument to you is that in a triple bottom line, when we take these community things, it may cost us in a short term more money, but long term, we're just going to increase our profitability because we're going to be able to last a lot longer. We're not going to be fighting litigation. We're going to be doing all those types of things. And these are the things that I think long term will end up being beneficial to the industry and beneficial to business and profitability in a long term, taking a long term approach. So this is sort of where I would like to get into questions. I think there's some questions in the chat that I'd be happy to answer. But that's sort of where I am now. There's my contact information, and I'm happy to talk to you and share about it more. as we go along. So would you like me to just answer the questions as I see them in the chat here, or?
Wonderful and talk related to this tourism, hospitality, and all these political economy crisis and everything. Now I would like to invite Professor Das for go take a comment, then we'll conduct the question and answer.
All right, so I know we're getting towards the end of the time, so I want to make sure I'm really sensitive about this, but what is the political economy of tourism in South Carolina, and what are the segment of the GDP? So once again, in Charleston, it's probably the first or second most important industry in the city. The first most important is, believe it or not, is education and healthcare are the probably 1A, 1B, and tourism is a very second thing. Although when tourism was tourism is a big time employer of a lot of people in that city, and if you don't have, and South Carolina in general, and it's a big part of the tax revenue. And this is what a lot of people don't understand. South Carolina, particularly the accommodations and taxes, are a big portion of the tax revenue coming into the state. So they're a huge portion. So it's not necessarily the GDP per se in the same way as how much revenue is generated for the taxing and taxing abilities. So how do you react to Nimbyism that opposes development so far as pollution and crime and climate is concerned? This is really important because once again, you see places like Maui and you see places like things where they built right on the beaches. They haven't been doing the things to protect the environment. And I think it's a critical element that you need to understand that your environment, and once again, talking about the triple bottom line, you need to balance that out. And if you're having pollution and development and climate, it's going to affect your business negatively in the long term. You know, most of the time when people are ruining the environment or ruining the things, they're really thinking in a short-term mode. And what we need to do is create more and more people thinking about long-term, thinking about taking a sustainable approach to business. So, and then the next question is, if you don't mind, please, a few lines about Miami Beach, the dream of many people. Well, Miami Beach, once again, while I haven't spent a ton of time there, but it's a very similar thing where you have a community where you have a very diverse community where the jobs and the things like that, they're having a hard time finding employees, and people can't live anywhere. You work in the industry, can't live anywhere in Miami Beach. So therefore they can't find employees. They can't find staff, and you can't have an industry like tourism if you can't have staff. And if staff have to travel 2 hours or to get to their jobs, people aren't going to do that. They're going to find other opportunities. Or you're going to get the weakest staff possible. You're going to get the people who can't get employed in other things, and that makes your product weaker. So when people are the product, you need to have ways to make the product. If you want to enhance your product, you need high quality staff, which means people have to be able to live close enough to be able to come and work for you. You know, it's a very different mentality. You know, it's really important, I think, for businesses to start to think this way. And I think this is what tourism learned during COVID, is this idea that you need to think longer term, and and yes, there's short-term benefits, but if you're only taking the short-term benefits, it's really going to cost you in the long run. So that's sort of, tourism in a lot of ways is lying in its own bed right now as a result of their actions pre-COVID. They didn't act in a sustainable way, and they're seeing the results of that. The policies were very much anti-tourism. Why? Because there was legit reasons why you do that, but it was also the public sentiment wasn't going to support the tourism industry because they weren't seen as being a positive thing. So they weren't going to get that public support in the same way. So when it comes to policy, having that is really important. I hope I answered all those. I know we're running short of time, so I didn't want to take too much time on people here.
Definitely, sir. Sir, I would like to brief some more highlight of your idea, tribal tourism. When you try to impose these third world countries, this community engagement you rightly mentioned about your presentation, how could you generate revenues from these areas and these serious these left-wing extremists, how to solve these issues in terms of this tourism as the key sector of these areas, and in particular the regions, particularly I am talking about the holistic approach of this Indian context and BCSB's particular Odishan contest, even South Odishan contest, where the tribal population is much more high. We living in a state, I wish to share some information with you that 22% people are tribal migrations, and they belong to very small domain of communities, and they have always very vibrant possibilities of tribal tourism as per se. What is your ideas and how to preserve these particular research engagements related to policy as the key observation of their point of view, and how to resolve these issues in terms of political economy? What is your suggestions and what is your ideas in terms of this global phenomenon context of how to promoting these tribal tourisms in a international level?
Okay, so once again, because I don't know enough about India to really get into specific things, but I'll tell you right now, in a lot of third world countries, this sustainable approach becomes even more important, because a lot of times I can talk a lot about the Caribbean because I know quite a bit about the Caribbean, which is very similar in a lot of ways. You had these investors come in and they build these resorts and all the profits leave the islands and all the profits leave the community because, you know, the investors come in, they don't care about the communities, and all of a sudden they look up one day and all of a sudden all the community doesn't want to work with them and they fight them on every single thing. And they wonder, why are these people doing it? We're providing jobs, but it's more than that. And let me go to your other side of the question is, and I'll talk about it in relation to the indigenous population in Canada. You know, they've been trying to develop tourism with the indigenous population in Canada for a long time. And what happened was people thought, oh, we're just going to do it the same way. We're going to open up these things. And the communities didn't necessarily want mass tourism, you know, on the reserve. They didn't want mass tourism around. They wanted quality tourism. You know, they wanted, you know, they didn't want people gawking at their culture and gawking and looking at the things. And this is where you have to build tourism with a lot of conversation and a lot of development. And this is where you need to really respect the community wishes and community goals. So for example, in Charleston, you know, I'll give you this example. You know, there was a place that wanted to do a reenactment of the slave sales. And the community just was, no, it's the history of the place, but this would be totally unacceptable to the community. It would put us in a really bad light, and it would make everything, you know, and it's a constant battle there because, yeah, the history is real and people need to see the history, but it's also then you're battling what community wants its destination to, they don't want to be constantly dealing with negativity, right? And these are something I think are really important issues. So when you're dealing with local populations, you have to develop tourism in a way that the community is going to buy in. Now, the big benefit is the community buys into it, right? All of a sudden, they're going to be participants. Think about this. When you go to a destination, you want to meet people from that destination. You want to be able to talk to them. You want to be able to learn about their history, right? It's one of the big draws why you travel. And if all the locals, you feel like you're an uninvited guest, you're not going to get that experience, and it's not going to be a positive experience. But when the locals buy in, when you're walking down the street and you look sort of lost and someone says, can I give you directions just randomly and helps you out, you know, or someone's in a restaurant and starts a conversation with you or whatever it may be, those are the moments that are special. And those are the moments that are really going to develop your tourism destination and make you more profitable long-term. Community really matters in relation to tourism. It's part of the product. And it's the same thing with the environment. If you ruin the environment, you're ruining the very product people are coming to see. you're destroying yourself if you don't take care of those two elements in relation to tourism. I hope I answered your question okay.
Now I'd like to invite Dr. Charan Das to initiate the talk with sir.
Namaskar to Professor Smith. Professor Smith, I want to raise my question related to tribal tourism. Tribal tourism has been conceptualized by focusing on visiting tribal villages in view of complete exposure to tribal culture. It has become popular among the tourists around the globe. Number two, in India, states like Madhya Pradesh, Chhattisgarh, Jharkhand, Odisha, Nagaland, and Himachal Pradesh witness maximum tribal tourism. Number three, tribal tourism has been instrumental in increasing maximum opportunities for financial upliftment of tribals in India. However, at the same time, the flip side indicates tribal tourism lacks cultural sensitivity and ethical approach to tribal tourism. Consequently, tribals have been oppressed, exploited, which is detrimental to their psychological conditions and the very existence of the primitive tribes in India. So I want to know, how do you articulate the future of tribal tourism in India and the world as well?
I think there's some really interesting parallels to learn from here. If you think about the Australian with the Aboriginal tourism and New Zealand with the Maori population, and you talk about Canada with the Indigenous population, you saw a lot of the exact same things you were talking about in the early stages of tourism, where people would come in and almost exploit the community in a lot of ways. They knew people wanted to see it, and they would come in and they would change traditions, they would change things and make them commoditization. There's actually a whole literature in tourism called trinketization, where you take cultural things and you make it a trinket that people can buy in the gift shop to take home with them, right? Where you're taking culturally significant things and doing that. And once again, I think in terms of tribal has always been, you have to have benefits going to the entire community. In almost all cases that I've seen where indigenous or tribal type of tourism doesn't work is when you have an outside developer come in, develop tourism, and then do it based on profit and not really considering the community and benefiting the community directly in a way that matters. So I think one of the things that I always say when you're developing products, especially very specific products like that based on culture, you need to have it develop from within. It has to develop within the community and kind of bubble up and develop in that way. And one of the things I always say is really, this is where government can actually help, is help support that development of the tourism within those communities and then build up around it. And I think that's the approach that seems to have worked the best over time.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor B.C. Das. Now I would like to request Dr. Saran to talk for the official vote of thanks. Dr. Saran.
Hello. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Bikram. Well, hospitality is simply an opportunity to show love and care. It's very rightly said. And thank you so much, Professor Smith, for connecting all of us with the Mother Nature, at least for some time. And let me also take this opportunity to say, at least me, to feel like, a home away from home. That kind of feeling was coming when you was, presenting your idea. So without wasting any more time, let me to offer our hearty thanks, and we are really obliged that you accepted our invitation. On behalf of CARD, we are extremely thankful, and we are obliged that you took your time out of busy schedule, you accepted our invitation, and in fact you have unfolded and you have delivered a very fantastic talk on one of the much talked but less touched segment of the developmental economy that we are talking about. And no doubt about it that with the precedence of the unprecedented pandemic, this entire tourism sector and this entire hospitality sector has come to a standstill. Nevertheless, time is changing, so is the scenario is changing, and we wish everyone can get back to their seat again. And yes, it is absolutely true when you said that this segment, this section was very badly affected. People at large were discussing about various sectors, but this sector was somehow remained untouched. Even if at all it was talked or discussed, the kind of energy, the kind of attention that it should have been, getting was not up to that mark. It was not a phenomena that was happening in India or let's say in any particular country. Rather, it was a global phenomena. But as things are improving, let us hope for the best. And of course, your talk must have benefited the n number of audience who are associated with us through this platform. So before I end, let me to quote one of the very vibrant statement of John Ruskin, who said that quality is not an accident; it is always the result of an intelligent effort. So thank you so much, Professor Smith, for yet again giving us a very thoughtful insight to this very vibrant topic and vibrant discourse. We are at CARD very much thankful for your presence and your talk. We hope you will continue your journey with us, and you will definitely be interested to explore how the opportunities and what are the different areas that can be explored, particularly in Odisha, as our previous discussion might have given you a thought that how the geographical and demographic dividend of Odisha is constituted, and what are the different opportunities that you can explore and you can see from your tourism and hospitality point of view, given the tribal and aboriginal kind of discussion that took place. So thank you so much once again for accepting our invitation and giving your insightful talk. At the same time, let me to take this opportunity to once again reiterate and emphasize that CARD has been very much instrumental in taking this discourse from last couple of months to bring a global consensus and uniting people from across the globe, and of course from community as well, to build and to shape a new thought, at least a consciousness among its citizens, by touching the several dimensions of development indicators that we talk, starting from education to hospitality as you see today, and health, nutrition, so on and so forth, where the last people of our community is engaged, is not deprived, and is availing his or her right, irrespective of his background. So, on behalf of CARD, we are also thankful to all our partner institutions, all our mentors and advisors, right from Central University of Koraput, IIM Sambalpur, Revensa University, who has been always supportive and instrumental in facilitating this discourse and encouraging all the members of CARD, and supporting us in every form to take this discourse and take this journey ahead. We at the CARD we pay our heartiest thanks to all our partnering institutions, our advisors, our mentors for being with us. And last but not the least, let me to also take this opportunity to give our hearty thanks and appreciation to all our viewers who are connected with us from different parts of the world and through different medias as well, social medias as well, who have been very active, vigilant, and very proactive and participative in their nature to take this journey ahead. We at CART are very much thankful to all our participants. We wish and we also request them to be with us. And as we all know that very soon the situation is improving and things will fall in place. So if if everything goes fine, we'll have another big round of discussion where we will try to collect all those things and we'll definitely disseminate these things with you all. Thank you so much for your participation, for your suggestion. With this note, thank you all and good night. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Smith, and also looking forward for your future engagements and any suggestions with highly considered note. With this note, the meeting shall concluded now, and looking forward your very important invitation from our side to visit India and visit many as possible to the tribal tourism what we locating for now. Bye-bye from India, good night from India, and have a good day.
Thank you all.